You're watching I-24 News. I'm Eli Roberts in Tel Aviv with the top stories at this hour. We start with Iran. The country's leaders saying they will restart uranium enrichment if the 2015 nuclear agreement fails. They say they'll do it without any limits. A government official making this statement.
These are the preparatory works for a possible scenario if in an unfortunate situation the JCPOA fails, then Iran can restart its activities without any limits that's already being under the JCPOA.
Tehran also saying that's it. The 2015 nuclear deal either stands as it is or it ends altogether. No amendments, no limitations, no changes to its ballistic missile program or its support for militias in the Middle East. Iran also giving another no to the International Atomic Energy Agency, saying they don't plan to up their cooperation with that group. The agency saying that Tehran is following the agreement as it stands now. But efforts to allow snap inspections are one thing the international community has called for. Right now, inspectors must give 28 days notice before entering a nuclear site. France, Germany, and the UK all working overtime to try to keep the 2015 nuclear agreement in place after the U.S. decided to pull out of the deal in May. The leaders of France, Germany, and the UK all calling on the U.S. to not slap sanctions on companies from their countries that do business with Iran. That issue very much at the forefront of talks today between British Prime Minister Theresa May and Prime Minister Netanyahu. May saying that Britain is committed to keeping Iran from getting nuclear weapons, but also talking with Netanyahu about how to make that happen. In a separate conversation, Prime Minister Netanyahu worked to explain that the demonstrations on Gaza's border with Israel are not peaceful. He brought up the Palestinian attempts to cut through Israel's border fence while also putting explosives on the border and sending flaming kites into Israel. Here's how he put it.
Prime Minister May, it's always a delight to visit with you and speak with you about issues of common concern. Today I wish to focus on two issues, two goals that we share. The first is how to make sure that Iran does not have nuclear weapons. And the second is how to roll back Iran's aggression in the region, and specifically in Syria. And I think we can find ways to work together to achieve both goals. As far as Gaza is concerned, I think the problems there are rooted in the fundamental goal of Hamas to destroy Israel.
Netanyahu also saying that the problem in Gaza starts with Hamas's recurring role that it wants to destroy Israel. That goal made official in Hamas's official charter. We turn now to the cancellation of the Argentina national soccer team's match against Israel. It was planned for this Saturday. It is a blow for local sports fans. Whatever the reasons for the move, it is certainly a victory for the campaign to boycott, divest, and sanction Israel over its policies toward the Palestinians. Our senior Middle East correspondent Mohammed Al-Qasim takes a look at a big win for the BDS movement.
Argentina announced Wednesday it would pull out of a highly anticipated exhibition match with Israel that was due to take place on Saturday in Jerusalem. Head of the Palestinian Football Association, Jibril Rajoub, celebrated the move and said it sent a sharp global message.
A sport achievement, but if you want to call it a victory, I think it's a victory for those who are abide, respect the mission of sport, ethics and values of sport, far from politics and political agendas.
Rajoub launched an aggressive campaign against the Argentinian Football Association, also personally targeting legendary footballer Leo Messi, who reportedly received threats on his life, as did other players and their families. The head of the Argentine Football Association confirmed those threats played a vital role in the decision.
What we have lived in the last 72 hours, the actions, the threats that have occurred, have led us to make the decision not to travel. My responsibility is to fight for the health and physical integrity and safety of the entire delegation. And in my role as president, I made this decision.
A statement released by the BDS movement thanked the team for its decision.
Football fans and Palestinian human rights supporters have urged the Argentinian team and superstar football player Lionel Messi to cancel the match set to take place in an Israeli stadium built on the ethnically cleansed Palestinian village El Malcha in response to Israel's criminal shoot-to-kill or maim policy against peaceful Palestinian protesters in Gaza.
This successful campaign is only the latest in a series of efforts in recent years by BDS to block public events and international concerts from taking place in Israel, also aiming to tarnish Israel's image abroad and hinder diplomatic ties between Israel and other states. BDS operates through calls on social media, worldwide protests, and petitions against companies and individuals who have ties with Israeli bodies. Also recognizing the event's title Israel Apartheid Week at various universities across the world against the Israeli occupation of the West Bank and Gaza. In the list of cancellations attributed to BDS is pop star Shakira and other celebrities. And whether Argentine's match is a sign for things to come or not, the results for now is BDS 1, Israel 0. Hamad Al-Qasim, I-24 News.
And from a soccer match to the U.S.-Turkish relationship, a long-needed agreement between Washington and Ankara happening today. American allied Kurdish forces in Syria, they're called the YPG, now able to leave the northern Syrian province of Manbij. Turkey calls the group's fighters terrorists and has been nothing but critical of American involvement with the group. Turkey so adamant that the U.S. not get involved in the region that it threatened a direct confrontation with the YPG that possibly put American-backed forces in the line of Turkish fire. The agreement happening after months of debate, ending with a meeting in Washington between the U.S. Secretary of State and his Turkish counterpart. A Turkish-American coordinated force is set to take over Manbij once YPG fighters get out. We are now learning that Iran and Hezbollah do not plan to withdraw from Syria anytime soon. Lebanese officials say the two groups plan on staying in Syria until the country is liberated, calling for its territorial integrity to be restored. Iranian-backed Hezbollah, a key ally alongside Russia, in support of Syrian President Bashar al-Assad during the 7-year-long Syrian civil war. Both Israel and the United States now demanding that Iran leave Syria entirely. Israel also saying that Hezbollah should make an exit. We turn now to the United States. Donald Trump lawyer and former New York City Mayor Rudy Giuliani coming out with some shocking allegations this evening. He says special counsel Robert Mueller's team is trying to frame President Trump. Giuliani making that statement, claiming that the Mueller team is made up of Democrats who want to get Trump in trouble. Those are his words. For clarification, Mueller is a registered Republican. Mueller's team is investigating possible collusion between the Trump presidential campaign and the Russian government. That investigation already leading to criminal charges against several Trump campaign aides. It is an open question, according to Giuliani, if Trump will sit for an interview with the special counsel. Giuliani also touching on North Korea. He says North Korean leader Kim Jong-un was on his hands and knees begging for the summit to happen after Trump canceled it in May. That summit is set to happen on June 12th in Singapore. And if it looked like a reality show at the White House, there's a reason why. Kim Kardashian meeting President Trump, both reality TV stars, and that meeting led to hard action. Trump pardoned 63-year-old grandmother Alice Johnson for a nonviolent drug offense. She had been serving life behind bars. Kardashian reportedly used the meeting with Trump to make a case for Johnson. The White House saying Johnson has been a model prisoner since she was jailed back in 1996. And we are learning more about a breaking story out of the UK. A fire devastating the Mandarin Oriental Hotel in London's Hyde Park. You can see the flames right there coming off the roof of the building. The blaze calling for 20 fire trucks, more than 120 firefighters working to put it out. No word at this hour on possible injuries. The hotel had just been renovated in what the Mandarin Oriental Group called the most extensive restoration in the hotel's 115-year history. Next on I-24 News, we are following Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's visit to Europe and the fallout after that soccer match was canceled. Argentina pulling out against Israel after death threats made against its players and their families. Stay tuned, more next.
Esta semana en News 24, Israel mejora su sistema aéreo de defensa. La cúpula de hierro, una maravilla tecnológica. El doctor Ricardo Wolf, admirador de Fidel Castro, fue embajador de Cuba en Israel. Dima Taya, israelí árabe musulmana, orgullosa de representar a su país en el exterior. News 24, el magazine semanal en español de I24 News.
Every stone, every street, every scar tells the story of Israel. A place that speaks of the souls of Jews, Christians, and Muslims alike. Changed by time and conflicted, its magic still echoes in the hearts of its people. Join I24 News' Jordana Miller on a journey through history. Watch Holy Land Uncovered every Sunday at 10:05 a.m. Eastern, only on I24 News.
We are continuing to follow Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's visit to Europe. He has already met with German Chancellor Angela Merkel and French President Emmanuel Macron. Now he's in London, where meetings have been happening throughout the afternoon with British Prime Minister Theresa May. And that's where we find I24's London correspondent Jonathan Sacerdote. And Jonathan, let's start with the basics. What are May and Netanyahu talking about today, and why is it significant?
So when Theresa May met Benjamin Netanyahu earlier on this afternoon, they discussed the same things he's been taking with him on his mini tour around Europe. That is, Iran and Iran, as he put it. He wanted to discuss the Iran deal, the JCPOA, as it is less catchily called. And also he wanted to discuss Iran's behavior in the region in general, what he called Iran's aggression, that is specifically on issues like ballistic missiles and involvement elsewhere in the region. Theresa May, of course, was a sympathetic set of ears, but she made it very clear from the get-go that Britain was not going to withdraw from that nuclear deal unless Iran broke the terms of the deal first.
So Netanyahu is asking Britain to take action. What kind of action is realistic, given what you just said?
Well, given what he said yesterday in France, it seems clear that he's not asking for these European countries to come out and say that they are tearing up the deal and withdrawing in the way that Donald Trump did. It seems that for him, it's enough that Trump has done that, because this means that there will be economic implications for European countries who decide to continue dealing with Iran, even though they say they want to carry on respecting the rules of the deal so long as Iran does. And to that end, several of these European leaders got together and wrote a letter that was sent on Monday, revealed today, to the US, asking for those sanctions not to be affecting the European countries who continue to do business in Iran. They didn't want the secondary sanctions to have an economic consequence on those big deals that they're now interested in making in Iran. Of course, the whole point of what Donald Trump has done, he would say, and Mr. Netanyahu would agree, is that this is the exact reason that he's taking that action, that there will be an economic effect on any country that decides to carry on dealing with Iran.
You know, Jonathan, you're there on the ground in London. You hear what people say every single day. And my question for you is Iran really worth it for companies who are based in Britain to essentially expose themselves to the possibility of experiencing sanctions imposed by the U.S.?
Well, Britain, of course, was very keen to get involved with increased trade with Iran, especially with Britain leaving the European Union in those Brexit negotiations. Trade elsewhere in the world became even more important than it already was, and Iran represents a very big potential area for growth. But as you say, the risk now is that it's down to a straightforward choice between America and Iran. And given that choice, it's clear that commerce in the UK will do better by far if it doesn't alienate the US. That's why that letter is asking for special treatment so that they don't have to make that choice. And that's why it's highly likely that Donald Trump and his White House won't accept that plea.
All right, Jonathan, and I want to shift gears with you really quickly because Netanyahu also brought up Gaza, and that comes after the 7 weeks of demonstrations on Gaza's border with Israel, the Palestinians trying to cut through the border fence and even sending kites with fire bombs attached. What was Netanyahu telling May about that situation today?
When Theresa May brought that up in their meeting, she referenced the large number of Palestinians who had been killed during those riots on the border, saying that there had to be something that could be done to make the situation easier for those in Gaza. But she did at the same time recognize Israel's right to self-defense. fairly well-worn formula used by British governments over the years. But Netanyahu was keen to point out that as far as he was concerned, the harsh situation in Gaza was not as a result of Israel's actions, but of course was the result of Hamas taking hostage with all those people living in Gaza and using them as human shields in their efforts to storm the border.
All right, and it has been a busy day for you, Jonathan. Thank you so much for that fantastic reporting. We turn now to Argentina, the country's football association calling off a match that was set to happen in Jerusalem this Saturday between Israel and Argentina. The cancellation comes amid fears of safety. Death threats made against players and their families by demonstrators. They don't want Argentina to play in Jerusalem. And violence is something to take very seriously. I-24's diplomatic correspondent Ellie Hockenberg following those threats, but also the fallout possibly in relations between Israel and Argentina.
Well, Eli, I think that the end game of this story, it doesn't really matter what was the incentive or what was the reason behind the cancellation at this point in time. The end game is rather how it is being perceived. And to a certain extent, it is being perceived as a Palestinian threat and an Israeli loss. But here in Israel, there's still an ongoing discussion on why did it happen. And earlier this evening, Israeli Culture and Sports Minister Miri Regev convened a special press conference to explain why. Let's take a quick listen to some of her remarks.
The decision to cancel the games stems from one reason only: the threats of terrorist factors sent to Messi and his family and other players on the team. We see the blood-stained pictures directed at the Argentina national team. This is an old new terror that frightens details and intimidates athletes.
Yeah, so this is what Miri Regev had to say, and she's somewhat at the eye of the storm when we're talking politics in this respect. But Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who is still in London, as we've just heard from Jonathan Sacerdoti, told our fellow reporters escorting him in his Euro trip, told them that Israel might be facing more international pressure in different fields, especially when we're talking about high-profile events, most notably the Eurovision contest. Israel won the contest only recently, and politicians already vowed to hold this event in Jerusalem. And the Eurovision committee is already asking Israel to choose perhaps a less contentious location to hold this this event to avoid any further conflict. So again, in terms of PR, it's not a very good day for Israel and the international community.
Okay, and for those who don't know, the boycott, divest, and sanctions movement is very active in trying to get companies and people to not purchase products or to participate in events, for example, that happen in Israel. A lot of people are saying that what happened in Latin America, Argentina, of course, being there, is something that is similar to what happened in Europe some years ago. Quickly, are there any parallels that we can draw with this?
Well, definitely. The BDS movement is very much active in these areas, of course, fueled or supported by the Palestinian Authority. And again, this is being perceived or presented as some sort of a victory on their part, regardless to what was the actual reasons for the cancellation of the game. But just another note in terms of Israeli politics, you know, now the blame game starts, and it seems as if Miri Regev is the big loser, so to speak, at this point in time.
Ellie, thank you for that. And next on I-24 News, an American hero shot dead 50 years ago this week. How America's future could have been different had it never happened. Stay tuned.
It is easy to have misconceptions about the Middle East.
Quand on vient faire son métier de reporter ici, c'est pas pour faire de la figuration. On évolue dans une région sensible où chaque mot compte.
It would be easy to settle for just one point of view.
يهمني أمر تعدد الثقافات.
I've always seen this sort of misunderstanding of this region.
In the most sensitive area of the world.
We work 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. There's no room for mistakes.
We want to make sure that the viewers get the full picture from all angles and break down the complexity of all these issues affecting us.
Our duty is to show the whole picture.
C'est sans doute le meilleur endroit pour analyser et décoder l'actualité internationale.
To explore all the angles.
telling the precise story, just the facts, nothing else.
To tell you the whole story.
وجهات النظر المختلفة، الآراء المتضاربة أحيانا تجعلنا نقدم أفضل المعلومات.
To give a voice to all the players.
Et mettre en valeur la liberté d'expression.
This is much, much bigger than any of us.
I-24 News. See beyond.
The Middle East, cradle of civilization, epicenter of the major crisis and conflicts that affect our world today. I-24 News is a witness. Our journalists live and breathe there every day. Get all the latest from our studios in Tel Aviv, New York, Washington, and Paris. As news happens where it happens. I-24 News. See beyond.
Stories. Stories that touch your heart and open your eyes. Stories that take you on a journey and show you something you will never forget. Look through the lens and see what others see. High definition, documentaries and discussions that connect us all. Join Lauren Izzo at 10:03 p.m. Eastern, only on I-24 News.
Fearless, timely, and always engaging. Every night, David Schuster brings the news from around the world to your front door. Watch Stateside, weeknights at 9 p.m. Eastern, only on I-24 News.
I-24 News.
Welcome back. You're watching I-24 News. Already, it's been 50 years since Robert F. Kennedy was shot dead. He was the front runner in the U.S. elections held later that year. I-24's Michael Schur met RFK and looks back at the day that some say might have changed America's future.
Vietnam, civil rights, the Cold War. June 4th, 1968 found an America immersed in national upheaval and international uncertainty. 2 months to the day after Martin Luther King Jr. was killed in Memphis, and less than 5 years after President John F. Kennedy was shot dead in Dallas. Working to change the trajectory of these turbulent times, former Attorney General Robert Francis Kennedy, the younger brother of the slain president, was gaining momentum in his run for president, winning Democratic primaries in Nebraska, South Dakota, and on that night, June 4th, 1968, in California. So when Robert F. Kennedy was giving a victory speech in the early morning Pacific time hours of June 5th in Los Angeles after having won the presidential primary here, for many there was again hope in the United States.
My thanks to all of you, and now it's on to Chicago, and let's win there. Thank you very much.
Moments later, the senator was struck by bullets fired from the gun of 24-year-old Sirhan Sirhan.
What happened? Do you know? Nobody said he's been shot. It's an absolute madhouse. People are screaming and shouting. The Kennedy staff are all just in panic. There's just absolute madness back there.
A doctor! We need a doctor right here. The microphone, please, immediately.
He lay mortally wounded on the hotel floor, comforted by a busboy. Kennedy was still alive when rushed to Good Samaritan Hospital. Awakened at boarding school, 14-year-old Robert Kennedy Jr. was brought home and flown to Los Angeles to be at his father's side. Today, Bobby, an environmental attorney and activist, remembers the happy times and the social causes that define being a Kennedy. In Bobby's new book, American Values, Lessons I Learned from My Family, he describes life with his parents, Bobby and Ethel, and his 10 siblings at Hickory Hill, their Virginia home that served as something of a second White House.
Many of the great issues of the time, the civil rights battles, Mississippi to get James Meredith into Ole Miss, the battles with George Wallace, the Bay of Pigs, the battle with the steel industry, and ultimately the Cuban Missile Crisis. A lot of the decisions at that time were being made on the patio or, next to the pool or around the dining room or living room table.
His son's words are a stark reminder of who RFK was as a father and who he might have been as a president.
Did your dad talk to you about how
most American kids weren't growing up the way the Kennedys were. Was there a sensibility or sensitivity even to that that was imbued in you by your family?
When my father visited the Mississippi Delta and realized that there were children in this country that were starving at war, he came back to our house and he said, I just came from a home where there were two families living in a space smaller than this dining room. And the children had one meal a day of rice. And I hope that when you get older, that you will do something about that. So we were constantly imbued with this idea that, we'd been given these gifts and that, we were trustees, that we were supposed to do something for other people.
1968, I mean, it was such a tumultuous time in America. Where do you think we are today compared to the 60s and what we've taken from that experience?
Well, I think that in some ways America did not get over the 60s. There was a series of traumas in the 60s that pushed us away from that idealistic path that, we had begun with in the early 60s. Our country today, in many ways, is unrecognizable. It's no longer, I don't think, we can any longer claim to be the model democracy or the exemplary nation that we used to be. In many ways, we have, we've become an example of the failure of the great experiment with self-government. That downward trend began in the 60s, and I think the assassinations were, and also the kind of the unwillingness to be truthful by the big institutions of our governments about those assassinations and about Vietnam.
Learning from history, Michael Schur for us tonight. 3 more astronauts on their way to space. They took off from the Baikonur Cosmodrome today. Their destination, the International Space Station. They will spend 2 days in orbit before docking with the space station. After that, they'll be spending 5 months in orbit. And finally, the nearly century-old Miss America pageant will say goodbye to the swimsuit part of the competition. Contestants will no longer be judged based on their physical appearance. This event will no longer call itself a pageant. This, in an effort to modernize their image during the time of the Me Too movement, which has shown a very harsh light on sexual harassment. The swimsuit competition will be replaced by an interview of contestants. The competition will be broadcasted from Atlantic City on September 9th, later this year. And those are the top stories at this hour. Stay with the conversation on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, and on our website at i24news.tv. You're watching I24 News.